What was the first state of the United States? This is actually a really complicated question that has multiple different answers depending on how you want to define your terms. If you're thinking about it in terms of when the states joined the Union, then the answer is pretty simple. The first state of the United States was New Hampshire. After all, it was one of the original 13 colonies and was one of the first states to join the Union in 1788. And it has remained a state ever since. So it's definitely a contender for the title of first state. However, if we look at this question more broadly, there are some other possible answers. And there are even other states that might have a claim to being the first state, depending on how you interpret things. So let's talk about what exactly makes a state and where the idea of states even came from. As far as the word state goes, it doesn't have much of a history in the United States. It was used occasionally during the Revolutionary War to describe the colonies, but not very often. Instead, the founders preferred the term states, which they used to distinguish the independent political entities of the time from individual colonies, which were still technically under the rule of the British Empire. In fact, the Declaration of Independence refers to the 13 colonies as these United Colonies. But as the United States grew, people eventually stopped referring to them as the United Colonies, and instead began using the term United States, a term that was actually coined by a writer named John Dickinson. He suggested the name United States in America in a pamphlet he wrote in 1776 in an effort to get the colonies to unite together against British rule. Although the word state wasn't commonly used to describe the colonies, the idea of a state had been around in Europe for quite some time. In fact, many scholars say the concept of a state originated with the Peace of Westphalia, a series of treaties that ended the 30 Years' War in 1648. During the peace negotiations, the various German states made up of the Holy Roman Empire demanded recognition as sovereign and independent states. This type of state was similar to the feudal states that had existed in Europe for centuries, each ruled over by a monarch or prince. But the idea was that these states were now sovereign, meaning they were self-governing and could make their own laws. When the American colonists decided they wanted to break away from the British Empire, they adopted this idea of a state and applied it to their own situation. Each of the 13 colonies was its own kind of state, a sovereign and independent political entity. But what the founders created with the United States was something new. The U.S. was the first country to be formed of sovereign states that were united under a central government. In theory, this meant that the federal government had no power over the states, and the states had no power over the federal government. They were equal to each other. Now, this didn't last very long. The central government quickly gained power over the states, but that's a topic for another video. But who were the first states to join the Union? Well, the original 13 colonies were all considered states as they were each sovereign and independent. However, only 9 of them were considered founding members of the United States after the Constitution was ratified in 1788. Those 9 were New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. Delaware, North Carolina, and South Carolina didn't join until later that year, while Georgia was the last original colony to join the Union in 1788. So, if you consider the order in which they joined the Union, then the first state was technically New Hampshire. However, if we're talking about states that were sovereign and independent like the modern definition of a state, then we have to look back to before the United States even existed. Before the American Revolution, the colonies were subject to the British Empire and weren't sovereign or independent. They were still a part of the Kingdom of Great Britain. But there was another empire in North America that also claimed these lands, the Spanish Empire. You see, the Spanish had established settlements along the coast of Florida, but most of their territory was further south in what is today the southern United States and Mexico. Even so, the Spanish still claimed all the land north of their settlements, including what is today the southeastern United States. Now, the Spanish never really controlled any of this land. They had sent explorers inland to try and conquer the native tribes, but those efforts failed. So the vast majority of their claimed territory was completely empty. But that didn't stop them from claiming it. And this meant that when the United States declared independence, it was really only independent from the British Empire. It was still technically a part of the Spanish Empire. Now, it took a few years for this issue to sort itself out, but eventually Spain and Britain negotiated the Treaty of Paris, which gave the United States all of the land from the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River, essentially giving the United States all of the land that's in it today. But between 1776 and 1783, the United States was technically only a part of the lower 48 states. Alaska, Hawaii, California, Oregon, Washington, and all the rest were still claimed by Spain. And this is where we run into our final complication. Between 1776 and 1783, there were two other territories that were sovereign and independent. They were the Republic of Florida and the Republic of the Two Sicilies. The Republic of Florida was a breakaway state that was formed by the Spanish colony of Florida after the start of the American Revolution. It lasted only about 2 years before Spain retook the territory. Meanwhile, the Republic of the Two Sicilies was formed when the Spanish colonies of Louisiana and West Florida declared independence from Spain during the same period. Like the Republic of Florida, it too was short-lived, lasting only about a year and a half before Spain retook those territories as well. Now, both of these republics were formed within the borders of what is today the United States, and both of them were sovereign and independent, just like the modern definition of a state. So, do they count? Technically, yes, but they didn't really control any land. They were both just small areas of a larger colony that broke off but were never recognized by anyone else. So, should they count? I'll leave that up to you. But if we don't count them, then the first state would be New Hampshire. The United States is often called the United States of America, or the U.S., or America. The United States of America is officially a federal republic of 50 states, a federal district, and several territories. A state is a region which has its own government and which is usually geographically separated from other states. There are currently 50 states in the United States. The first state to join the Union was New Hampshire in 1788, followed by Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Louisiana, Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, Alabama, Maine, Missouri, Arkansas, Michigan, Florida, Texas, Iowa, Wisconsin, California, Minnesota, Oregon, Kansas, West Virginia, Vermont, Nevada, Nebraska, Utah, New Mexico, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Alaska, Hawaii, and of course the newest state, Oklahoma, which joined in 1907.